You did everything right. You showed up to work. You paid your bills. You didn't splurge. You didn't live beyond your means. And somehow, you still can't breathe at the end of the month. You are not alone. You are not failing. And this is not a personal problem. This is a crisis. And today, we're going to prove it. With numbers, with stories, and with the truth nobody in power wants to say out loud. Let's start with the facts, because the scale of what's happening right now is genuinely staggering. A nationwide survey of 5,000 Americans, conducted across all 50 states, found that 9 in 10 people believe the United States is currently experiencing a full-blown cost of living crisis. 9 in 10. That's not a political opinion. That's not a partisan talking point. That is a near universal consensus across generations, income levels, zip codes, and voting histories. Gallup's annual Economy and Personal Finance Survey, one of the most trusted in the country, found that the high cost of living has topped Americans' list of their most important financial problems for multiple consecutive years. At its 2024 peak, 41% cited it in an open-ended question, meaning they weren't given a list to choose from, they just said it, unprompted. And here's the number that should stop you cold. A record 55% of Americans say their financial situation is getting worse, up from 47% just 2 years ago. The only time in modern history we've seen anything like this? The Great Recession. Let that sink in. We are not officially in a recession, but more Americans feel financially crushed right now than they did during one of the worst economic collapses in living memory. Let's get specific, because people don't fear an abstraction. They fear their actual bills. Housing costs rose over 14% between 2023 and 2025 alone. Not 14% over a decade, 14% in 2 years. Groceries? Coffee prices shot up nearly 19% in a single year. Beef? Up 15%. And if you think you can just swap to cheaper cuts, so is everyone else. Medical costs are up nearly 7%. Services broadly, haircuts, repairs, childcare, up over 8%. And this is before we even talk about tariffs, a new variable layered on top of existing inflation. 3 in 4 Americans, 75%, say they're worried that new tariffs will increase their cost of living even further. Here's what's vicious about this situation. Inflation's annual rate has come down from its 2022 peak of 9%. But here's what the headlines don't explain. Coming down from 9% doesn't mean prices went down. It means they went up more slowly. The damage was already done. Every grocery trip, every rent payment, every electric bill, these are priced against a permanently higher baseline. And wages? For most Americans, they have not kept pace. So you're running the same race, on the same legs, but someone quietly moved the finish line 2 miles further. Now, here's where it gets personal, because this crisis does not hit everyone equally. Working-class Americans are bearing the sharpest edge of this knife. 50% of working-class respondents in a Century Foundation survey earned less than $50,000 in 2024. Nearly 3 in 10 took on a second job or a side hustle, not for fun, not for savings, just to stay level. 52% of Americans now struggle to pay basic bills like rent on time. An equal number struggle to afford necessities like groceries. And Gen Z? They are entering adulthood into a world that has never been more expensive. 74% of Gen Z adults expecting a tax refund said they need it earlier than ever, not to treat themselves, but to survive the month. Meanwhile, nearly 3 in 10 Americans delayed or skipped medical care in the past year, not because they didn't need it, but because they couldn't afford the bill. When people in the richest nation on earth are rationing insulin and skipping doctor's appointments, that is not a personal failure. That is a systems failure. Here's something most financial coverage never talks about: why this particular fear is so consuming. Financial anxiety isn't just stressful, it's cognitively debilitating. Research in behavioral economics shows that when people are in financial scarcity, constantly calculating, juggling, and rationing, It occupies mental bandwidth that would otherwise go toward long-term thinking, creativity, and problem-solving. In other words, being broke is mentally exhausting in a way that compounds the problem. And the cost of living crisis specifically triggers what psychologists call anticipatory anxiety. Fear not just of what's happening now, but of what's coming. Will rent go up again? Will I be able to retire? What if I get sick? 62% of Americans worry they won't have enough money for retirement. 60% worry they couldn't cover medical costs if something serious happened. These aren't irrational fears. They are rational responses to real, documented risks.
The system isn't broken for everyone. For a lot of people, it was never designed to work in the first place. Let's talk about the single biggest driver of this crisis: housing. For decades, buying a home was the #1 path to building wealth in America. It was how middle-class families stabilized and grew. And right now, that door is all but shut for millions of people. Mortgage rates that climbed to 7, 8, even occasionally 9% in recent years have made buying a home a fantasy for first-time buyers. And because existing homeowners are locked into their low rates, they're not selling, which means inventory stays low, which means prices stay high. So renters are stuck renting. But rent has exploded too. Housing costs rose over 14% in just 2 years. Landlords, squeezed by their own costs, pass everything downstream. The result? A generation of people trapped in a loop. Too expensive to buy, too unstable to rent, and no clear exit ramp. When your housing isn't stable, nothing else is. Not your job security, not your health, not your family. Housing is not a real estate issue. It is the foundation of everything else. Here's what's interesting about how this crisis gets discussed in media and politics. When prices were rising, we were told it was transitory, then it was Putin, then supply chains, then consumers spending too much. The message has always been, the crisis is temporary, and it's not systemic. But Gallup has been tracking this for over 20 years. This is not temporary. This is a slow-motion, structural shift. And here's the tell. A Marist poll found that 70% of Americans say the cost of living in their area is not affordable for the average family. 70%. That's not a fringe view. That's a majority, across party lines. When 9 in 10 Americans agree on something, people who vote differently, who worship differently, who live in cities and on farms, that is not a political problem. That is a people problem. And the first step to solving a people problem is refusing to let it be rebranded as your personal failure. You are not bad at money. The math was changed on you. So what are people doing? Because sitting in fear doesn't pay the bills, and I won't leave you there. 2/3 of Americans have already switched to cheaper groceries or cut back on food altogether. Nearly 3 in 10 have taken on a second job or side hustle. 59% have recently reached out or plan to reach out to a financial professional because of market and inflation concerns. Here's what actually moves the needle. Track every dollar, not as punishment, but as power. You cannot fight what you cannot see. Bulk buy on non-perishables when prices dip. Treat your grocery run like the stock market. Buy more when it's cheaper. Explore community cost sharing, from grocery splits to shared childcare. Working-class families doing this are saving hundreds per month. And advocate loudly. The data shows policymakers respond when economic pain reaches a critical mass of voices. Your story is data. Use it. Here's the truth I want you to carry out of this video. The fact that you're struggling does not mean you're failing. 9 in 10 Americans feel it. A record number say their finances are getting worse. The math, housing, groceries, healthcare, energy, does not lie. But knowing this matters. Because the first thing financial fear does is isolate you. It makes you feel like you're the only one who missed something. The only one who didn't figure it out. You didn't miss anything.
This is the water everyone is swimming in right now. If this video helped you feel less alone or made something click, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop in the comments, what's the one cost that's hit you hardest this year? I read every single one. See you in the next one.